Every argument about the greatest fighter plane of World War II circles back to the same icon, the P-51 Mustang. It's the undisputed king, the sleek American legend that dominates every documentary, every museum exhibit, every heated debate among aviation enthusiasts. For over 8 decades, it's been hailed as the pinnacle of wartime engineering, the plane that turned the tide in the skies over Europe. But what if I told you there's a Spitfire variant that outran it, outclimbed it by staggering margins, outmaneuvered it in the heart-pounding twists of aerial combat, and even took down the world's first jet fighters? A machine so potent that RAF test pilots called it a game-changer, and even Luftwaffe aces admitted it was a nightmare to face. Yet it's barely a whisper in history books. Why? Because only 957 were ever built, overshadowed by the Mustang's massive production run. Today we're diving into the Spitfire Mark XIV, not to knock the Mustang but to reveal why the best dogfighter and the most crucial fighter were two different beasts entirely. Stick around because by the end you'll question everything you thought you knew about who really ruled the World War II skies. Let's start with the heart of this overlooked powerhouse, its engine. The original Spitfire Mark I, the hero of the Battle of Britain in 1940, roared to life with the Rolls-Royce Merlin III, a 27-liter V12 delivering 1,030 horsepower. That engine became legendary, powering the RAF through desperate dogfights and symbolizing resilience against overwhelming odds. Its distinctive growl still echoes at airshows, evoking the spirit of those who held the line when the world teetered on the brink. But by 1943, Rolls-Royce engineers had unleashed a beast, the Griffon 65. This monster displaced 36.7 liters, nearly 10 liters more than the Merlin, and cranked out a jaw-dropping 2,050 horsepower at standard boost, with later tweaks pushing it even higher. Imagine nearly doubling the power in a frame that was only slightly heavier, all while keeping those iconic elliptical wings that made the Spitfire so agile. Visually, the Mark XIV was a subtle evolution, but up close, it was transformed. The Griffon demanded a longer, more muscular nose to house its bulk, and it spun a massive 5-bladed Rotor propeller, replacing the 3- or 4-bladed setups of earlier models. This wasn't just a facelift, it created an aircraft that looked refined yet ferocious, like a thoroughbred racehorse crossed with a predator. Pilots who transitioned from Merlin-powered Spitfires described the sensation as electrifying. The raw thrust made it feel alive, eager to surge forward or climb vertically in ways that defied expectations. And that power translated directly into performance that left contemporaries in the dust. In level flight, the Mark XIV hit a top speed of 446 miles per hour at 25,400 feet, edging out the P-51D Mustang's 437 miles per hour at similar altitudes. That 9 miles per hour difference might seem minor on paper, but in the high-stakes arena of air combat, it's everything. It means dictating the engagement, choosing when to strike or disengage, and holding the initiative in pursuits where seconds decide survival. But speed was just the opener. The real showstopper was its climb rate. At plus 18 pounds of boost, it rocketed upward at 4,580 feet per minute from sea level, nearly a mile every minute. Cleared for plus 21 pounds later on, some tests recorded over 5,000 feet per minute, with peaks nearing 5,200. It reached 20,000 feet in under 5 minutes and pushed to a service ceiling of 43,000 feet, still climbing at 810 feet per minute at 40,000 feet where the air is razor thin. Compare that to the Mustang's 3,200 to 3,475 feet per minute climb and 41,900 foot ceiling, solid, but outmatched by 40 to 60% in the metric pilots swear by most. Altitude equals energy, energy equals options, and options equal dominance. The Mark XIV didn't just climb, it ascended with authority, allowing pilots to gain the high ground swiftly, dive with momentum, or escape threats that lesser planes couldn't outrun. Veterans reported it sustained steep climbs that felt almost effortless, instilling a confidence that changed how they fought. Turning performance sealed its edge. Those elliptical wings, with their low loading, let it pivot tighter than heavier rivals like the Mustang, whose laminar flow design prioritized efficiency over agility. In a dogfight's brutal ballet, the Mark XIV bled less energy in turns, recovering quicker to press the advantage. Only in dives did the Mustang pull ahead, its weight aiding acceleration downward. But overall, in the core elements of combat, speed, climb, turn, it excelled. So why isn't this aircraft celebrated? The answer lies in strategy, not superiority. The Mustang's true genius was range, over 1,650 miles with drop tanks, enabling escorts deep into Germany. The Mark XIV's 460-mile range limited it to shorter missions. In the next part, we'll explore how this shaped the air war and why the Mustang became indispensable. But for now, consider this: what if the plane that won the fights wasn't the one that won the war? The turning point came in the brutal summer of 1944, right after the Normandy landings. On June 13, the first V-1 flying bombs slammed into London, their eerie pulsejet buzz announcing death from the skies. These pilotless weapons flew low, often between 2,000 and 3,000 feet, at speeds up to 400 miles per hour or more, carrying nearly a ton of high explosive. They didn't dodge, didn't fight back, they just kept coming, relentless, day after day. Over 9,500 were launched at Britain, killing thousands and terrorizing a population that had already endured years of bombing. Most Allied fighters couldn't catch them in level flight at low altitude, where engines produced far less power than at optimal heights. Spitfire Mark XIV strained to keep up. Typhoons fell short. The V-1s ignored them, streaking toward civilian targets, homes, schools, hospitals, filled with families who had survived the Blitz only to face this new nightmare. But the Mark XIV could. Its Griffon engine and refined aerodynamics gave it the raw speed and acceleration needed to intercept these fast-moving threats over the English Channel and Kent countryside. Squadrons like No. 91, No. 322 Dutch, and No. 610 stood patrol in the diver corridor, engines roaring as pilots scanned for that telltale orange flame and rattling drone. Spot one and it was throttle wide open. Dive, close, line up the guns. A burst too close risked detonating the warhead and destroying your own plane in the explosion. A miss meant more devastation in London. The stakes were unimaginable. Pilots flew at treetop height, ground rushing below, chasing a machine that never tired or panicked. When ammo ran dry or guns jammed, as they often did in those frantic moments, some resorted to an audacious tactic. Slide in close, wingtip under the V-1's stubby wing, then roll sharply to flip it. The disruption tumbled the bomb's gyro, sending it spinning harmlessly into fields instead of neighborhoods. At 300 plus mph, wingtip to wingtip with a ton of explosives just feet away, one twitch meant instant death on impact. Only a nimble, powerful fighter like the Mark XIV could pull it off repeatedly. Over the campaign, Mark XIVs destroyed over 300 V-1s, more than any other Spitfire variant. They ranked third overall behind the Tempest V-638 and Mosquito around 428, but among daytime piston fighters chasing these horrors, they were second only to the Tempest. Those 300 intercepts saved countless lives, turning potential tragedies into empty craters in open countryside. As Allied forces pushed through France and overran V-1 launch sites by September 1944, the Mark XIV's role shifted eastward. Now it faced the cutting edge of German technology, the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Clocking over 540 miles per hour, it outran anything with a propeller by 100 miles per hour or more. Its arrival shocked Allied commands. Here was proof the Luftwaffe could still leap ahead technologically if production ramped up. But the 262 had vulnerabilities. Its Junkers Jumbo turbojets were slow to spool up, making it sluggish during takeoff, landing, and speed changes. Catch it in transition, and a piston fighter had a narrow window to strike. On October 5, 1944, pilots from No. 401 Squadron RCF, flying Mark XIVs with the 2nd Tactical Air Force over the continent, seized that window. They engaged in Me-262 in flight, positioning perfectly to close the gap during its vulnerable phase. Guns barked, hits registered, the jet went down. This marked one of the earliest confirmed air-to-air kills of a Me-262 by Allied fighters, and the first by a Spitfire variant. It wasn't luck. Mark XIV pilots continued tangling with 262s through the war's final months, using superior climb, agility, and acceleration to exploit those brief moments when the jet was exposed. A piston-engine fighter repeatedly downing the jet age's pioneer? That speaks volumes about the Mark XIV's capabilities and the skill of its pilots. Fast enough to intercept, maneuverable enough to track, powerful enough to hold position in a firing solution. Yet for all these triumphs, V-1s shattered, jets felled, the Mark XIV's story circles back to one unbreakable limit: range. On internal fuel, it managed roughly 460 miles total, giving a combat radius of 300 to 350 miles at best. Fly to the Dutch border, scrap for minutes, head home. That was its envelope. The Mustang? With drop tanks, it stretched to 1,650 miles or more, Berlin and back with reserves. From East Anglia bases, that meant escorting B-17s and B-24s deep into the Reich, tangling with interceptors over targets, then returning safely. No Spitfire including the Mark XIV could match it. The strategic bombing campaign, the effort to cripple German industry, depended on long-range escorts. Without them, bombers faced slaughter, as seen in the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids of 1943, where unescorted formations lost dozens in hours. The Mustang solved the crisis that nearly broke the 8th Air Force. Factories churned out thousands because range made it essential. The Mark XIV, for all its dogfighting brilliance, couldn't fill that role. Britain needed point defense interceptors. America needed deep penetration escorts. In the next part, we'll look at the official wartime verdicts, pilot accounts, and why history remembers one plane as the legend while the other remains a hidden gem. The question isn't which was better, it's which mattered more when the war hung in the balance. The official verdict came straight from the professionals whose job was to separate hype from reality, the Air Fighting Development Unit, AFDU, at RAF Wittering. In February 1944, months before D-Day, they ran a formal tactical comparison trial between the Spitfire Mark XIV and the Mustang III, the RAF designation for the P-51B and P-51C models, which were in many ways comparable to or even slightly faster than the later bubble canopy P-51D due to lower drag. This wasn't armchair analysis or a magazine shootout. It was a rigorous, combat-oriented evaluation by experts who flew both types under realistic conditions. Their report, AFDU number 108, laid it out plainly. Maximum speeds were practically identical. But in climb, the single most decisive factor in air combat, according to pilots who lived or died by it, the Spitfire 14 was very much better. Not marginally superior, not a slight edge, very much better. That 40 to 60% advantage in climb rate meant the Mark XIV could seize the vertical plane, gain altitude advantage, and dictate the fight from the start. Diving favored the Mustang, thanks to its heavier build and cleaner lines allowing better acceleration downhill. Turning? The Spitfire's elliptical wings and lower wing loading gave it the clear advantage in sustained circles. Rate of roll was similar between the two. The report wrapped up without crowning an absolute winner, noting these aircraft would rarely meet as enemies. Their roles were too different. But the raw data spoke volumes. In a pure dogfight at comparable altitudes, the Mark XIV held the upper hand in the metrics that mattered most when guns started firing. Test pilots who knew the Spitfire family inside out echoed this. Jeffrey Quill, Supermarine's chief test pilot and the man who flew virtually every variant from the prototype onward, described the Mark XIV as a splendid airplane in every respect. Coming from someone who'd felt every evolution of Reginald Mitchell's original design through the controls, that wasn't faint praise. He flew them all, the elegant Merlin-powered early Marks, the high-back Razorback Mustangs equivalents, and still called the Griffon-powered 14 Splendid without qualification. The power surge, the responsiveness, the way it climbed and turned, it felt like the pinnacle of the Spitfire lineage to the man who'd tested them relentlessly. Even the other side weighed in, and their words carry weight because they had no reason to exaggerate. Luftwaffe pilots, facing these machines in the closing months of the war, respected the late Griffon Spitfires deeply. Adolf Galland, the general who led Germany's fighter forces and flew combat himself, rated them among the most formidable opponents his men encountered. He had no incentive to boost British propaganda. He spoke from bitter experience. When the man commanding the Luftwaffe's Jagdflieger said your fighter was exceptional, it wasn't national pride talking. It was the enemy's honest assessment of what was trying to shoot them down. These aren't cherry-picked quotes. They're from men who evaluated fighters for survival, not spectacle. The AFDU existed to tell squadrons what worked in the sky and what didn't. Quill lived in the cockpit. Galland fought in it. All three pointed to the Mark XIV as something special in pure fighter terms. But performance on paper and in trials only tells part of the story. The real measure comes from combat logs, pilot debriefs, and the cold arithmetic of kills and losses. The Mark XIV entered service in January 1944 with No. 610 Squadron at RAF Exeter, just in time for the invasion buildup but too late to etch itself into the early war mythology of the Battle of Britain. Its pilots flew it in the crucible of Northwest Europe, intercepting V-1s at low level, tangling with FW-190s and BF-109s over the continent, and occasionally catching Me-262s in their vulnerable phases. In those fights the advantages shone through. Superior climb let pilots bounce from above or escape when needed. Tight turning radius helped in the swirling melees over Normandy and the Low Countries. Raw power from the Griffon allowed sustained maneuvers without bleeding speed as quickly as earlier Marks. Pilots transitioning to it often spoke of the shock. The airplane didn't just perform better. It felt eager, almost aggressive in the climb and turn. Yet the numbers remained small. only 957 built. Compare that to the Mustang's flood of production, and the cultural tide becomes inevitable. More Mustangs meant more pilots surviving to tell stories, more airframes preserved post-war, more appearances in films and airshows. The Mark XIV, brilliant as it was, stayed a specialist, superb in its niche but never ubiquitous enough to dominate memory. In the next part, we'll wrap this up by examining why historical memory favors the plane that won the strategic game over the one that dominated the tactical one, and what that says about how we remember wars. The Mark XIV wasn't just another Spitfire, it was arguably the finest piston fighter supermarine ever built. But wars aren't won by dogfighting alone.